Mexican records got the lights down low. Souldisco where the groovy people go. Hit play, let the music flow. Old school beats with a modern glow.
Hello everybody and a very warm welcome back to the latest episode of Hidden Jewels of Soul and Disco. I do hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. In this week's episode we are featuring Willie Tee. Why Willie Tee is, in my humble opinion, one of the most underrated singer, songwriter, musicians, producer, well, we'll discuss this after some needle drops.
They put me down. Yes, people in the world.
Wilson Turbinton, aka Willie Tee, was born on February the 6th in 1944. He grew up in New Orleans and especially at the Calliope Project. If you are not familiar with these kinds of projects which started in the early 60s all over the United States, I highly suggest that you check out my video about Joe and Garrett, where we have a deep dive into these projects. His musical influence were Professor Longhair and John Coltrane. And his first recordings took place at the newly found AFO Records Company, which was just founded, and AFO means All for One. His first release was in 1962 with the single Always Accused, All for One, and it was followed in 1963 by While I and I Found Out You Are My Cousin. His songs proved to be quite popular, and therefore Atlantic Records decided to release a single from Willie, and it was called Teasin You. It was released in 1965. Teasin You shouldn't be confused with his 1972 release on Gator, which was called Teasin You Again. These singles were followed by Walking Up on the One-Way Street and Thank You, John. During the later part of the 60s, Willie took part and played a lot of major venues, like the Apollo Theatre and Ivanhoe on Bourbon Street. On one of these occasions, none other than Cannonball Adderley approached Willie and asked him, well, you should absolutely do an album with instrumental music. You're a fantastic musician, go ahead and do it. And an album was also actually been recorded, but unfortunately it was never released. I've heard information that these tapes from this recording were recently discovered at Capitol Records vaults, but I couldn't actually confirm this information. But if you are somebody who works at Capitol Records and you are watching this, please consider releasing this material. It's long overdue. In 1970, Willie Tee finally released his first album, and here it is in all of its glory. It's called I'm Only a Man. It was conducted and arranged by the legendary, and I totally adore him, H.B. Burnham. You are in for a real treat. I consider this album as one of my favorite albums in my collection. And just to give you a little hint, if you don't want to listen to this whole album or say, oh, this is not my thing, please consider hearing the song People. It's an absolutely stellar record. If you want to have an original copy, it will cost you around $150 upwards. It's not easy to find, and it took actually me a long time to find a decent copy. I'm super happy with it. But don't worry, there's also a reissue available from Real Gone Music if you don't want to have the hassle with finding a decent copy nowadays. Real Gone Music offers you a reissue of that album. And once again, I highly, highly suggest it. In 1974, Willie led and co-wrote a band. And this band was called Wild Magnolias. And they released a self-titled album in 1974. And like I mentioned earlier, he co-wrote a lot of material. That album led to the fact that the Mardi Gras Indians were becoming mainstream, especially in the street funk scene. So that's thanks to Willie Tee. In 1974, he released another album, which was called Antiception. Willie Tee is very popular in the rap scene because samples of his tracks were used by Sean Combs, Lil Wayne, Ghetto Boys, just to name a few. So you'll find many of his samples on these recent recordings. His next album took quite some time. In 1988, he released an album with his brother Earl, and this was called Brothers for Life. He continued working in the music business, but on a more quiet level. After Hurricane Katrina almost destroyed New Orleans, he was offered a lecture at Princeton University, where he stayed for a couple of months to teach new musicians. In 2007, to be more specific, in April, he was introduced into the Louisiana Music Hall of Fame. And that's more than deserved, in my humble opinion. In September of the same year, Willie Tee passed away. 4 weeks before his death, his doctor told him that he has colon cancer and that the chances are not likely so well. So just after 4 weeks, he passed away. Once again, I can highly suggest that you check out Willie Tee's music. He was involved in many projects. If I would really deep dive into each and every project he was involved with, the artist he inspired, his influence on new music nowadays, we would have an hour-long feature documentary of Willie Tee. So please check him out. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. I don't want to finish that episode on such a sad note. I found a video clip of one of his last appearances, and I would love to watch and play this for you guys. The video quality is not the best, but for me it's the music that matters. So once again, thank you for watching. If you like that episode, I also highly suggest that you check out the playlist appearing here, and I catch you on the next one. Wow.